So when I think Wisconsin football, of course, I think back to a couple of years ago, and when Luke Fickell was hired, I thought, home run hire. This is the best hire of the offseason. And just because I'm seeing Minnie's name, I will uh, be a little bit more specific, because when I put out my coaches hiring rankings for that offseason, I think I put Luke Fickell 1 and Matt Rule 2, or maybe it was the other way around. I think it was there. Yeah, that would have been, or would they would have been one season off. Regardless, I thought Luke Fickell was a great hire. Now here we are after 7-6 and 5-7, and a brutal schedule coming up again this year. And what are you and the faithful thinking at this point?
I mean, listen, you're not wrong. Everybody, I should say, just about everybody in Wisconsin thought the same thing. Like, what a home run! You went and got Luke Fickell, the playoff coach that brought Cincinnati to the promised land. You're going to modernize this thing, and it just hasn't worked. Now, some of it is 2 years in Wisconsin. I think they made a mistake with Phil Longo. They've acknowledged that mistake. He was the offensive coordinator they brought in from North Carolina. He's moved on. Jeff Grimes has come in and has promised more of a return to what you're used to in Wisconsin with more modern elements. So a fullback, more motion, a little bit more. We're just going to run the ball. So I think there's some renewed optimism that maybe this is a little better fit for Wisconsin. But yeah, like this schedule is really rough. And how do you measure progress, even if you're a little better, when you have to play a Bama, a Michigan, Ohio State? You have to go to Autzen. You're still going to have to play in Iowa and Illinois. They're playing, I think it's 8 teams last year that were ranked. Indiana's on the schedule. This team could be better and still win 6 games. So, yeah, it's a brutal schedule. There is some renewed optimism that the offensive coordinator hire is at least going to align a little bit better with what Wisconsin has to do to be successful.
Now, Boise State certainly, yeah, prolific on offense. I don't know that he gets to bring Ashton Jeanty with him, however. Now, if we look at the quarterback situation, of course, Tyler Van Dyke out, Braden Locke out, Billy Edwards in, competing with Danny O'Neil from San Diego State. So how do you shake that one out?
Yeah, so the quarterback room is really interesting. And, last year, to your point, they had Tyler Van Dyke, who came in, and in week 3 the first series against Alabama, a non-contact injury, and it's just a terrible situation. So the quarterback room was kind of blown up from the start last year. And now everybody's gone. You mentioned Locke, you mentioned Tyler Van Dyke. The number 3 guy's gone as well, Mabry Mettauer, who was a freshman last year. So they brought in an entirely new room. And it's a little different this year. Last year, there was a competition, if you remember, in camp. It was Van Dyke and Locke, who's going to win it. And eventually Locke emerged, which I think was probably a foreshadowing of the fact that this room's not quite good enough. That you had a battle between those 2 guys, because Locke should have come in and just gotten that job. He should have just grabbed it by the horns and wasn't able to. This year's a little different. Billy Edwards has come in and he's the guy. From talking to people in the program, there's no competition. Billy Edwards is the guy. Really, really well liked already in the locker room. But it's, you're still talking about a guy who had 15 touchdowns and 9 picks last year. It's not a prolific guy coming over from Maryland. I think there's optimism that he can be solid. That's a word I've used a lot this offseason. Can the quarterback room go from, it was 17th in the Big Ten in passing efficiency last year? That's pretty bad. Can it go from that to solid? I think Billy gives you the potential to have a solid quarterback guy. Someone who's experienced. He's played in the Big Ten. He's a tough player. He can run the ball. He can move it with a little bit with his legs. And if he can become decent, having just a decent quarterback from where Wisconsin has been the last 2 years makes a dramatic difference. So that's the hope there with Billy Edwards. O'Neil started last year. So as a number 2, you could do way worse as a guy who started a bunch of games, has a little bit of athleticism. That's a pretty good number 2. So I think there's optimism in the program that they've upgraded at their number 1 spot and their number 2 spot in the quarterback room. But again, it's a low bar from where they've been. So if they can get decent, that can make a big difference for the running game and some of the pass catching options they have.
We got Ryan Herrings here breaking down the Badgers, Wisconsin football, as they go to work in the spring there in Madison. You can catch Ryan's work on Locked On Badgers. Ryan, when is the best time to catch you on your Locked On show?
Yeah, so usually shows drop at 6 a.m., but if anything breaks, we always go live. We talk about commitments, new coaching hires. I'm sure we'll talk about the fun schedule that awaits Wisconsin coming up. So really anytime, you can always hit me up on Twitter at Ryan and Bucky, talk all things Badgers, Big Ten football, basketball. Love doing all of it.
ever since Barry Alvarez got this thing rolling in the early 90s, there's been a premier back, and usually two and sometimes three. And Ches Malusi and Braylon Allen would be kind of the end of that in regards to known commodities. So, what does the backfield look like this year?
Yeah, that's a great question. So they have two redshirt sophomores. Geez, sophomores that they're really high on. Freshmen last year, Darian Dupree and Dylan Jones, who were both 4-star guys. And they like both those backs, but it's very unproven. To your point, there was a long line of we know who the next bell cow is, right? When you had a Monte Ball, you knew you had a Melvin Gordon behind him. You knew you had a Corey Clement in the wings. There's always that next guy. And it's a little bit more of we need to see it now. So there's a couple young kids there they really like. They purposely did not go in the portal this offseason to find a back because they believe in the young talent in that room. But now they're going to have to prove it. And it's a bit of a question mark. There's physical tools there for sure. But there's no proven names in that room, like you mentioned. And it's a bit of a wait and see. And some of that is this offense too. So going back to a point I made earlier, the running game is impacted if you can't throw the ball, which the Badgers were not able to do last year consistently. So there is hope that, Billy Edwards, Jeff Grimes, new offensive coordinator, they can open it up a little bit, and that should make it a little easier for these young running backs to get some room. But it's a lot of just wait and see in Wisconsin. I'll tell you this, people have really shifted from that first year where Fickell came in and they made a big production of it. The spring game that year, they called it the launch. I was there. Nothing launched. They threw 3 picks in that spring game. It was pretty bad, but they made a big production of it because Fickell was a big deal. And it's much more guarded optimism now, I would say. It's much more of we need to prove it. They know they need to prove it, and fans are much more, we need to see it. So that's kind of the mood in Madison right now. It's been a couple of years of hype. We kind of have to see it now.
CJ Williams moves on. Not a huge deal there. Will Pauling is the big loss at wide receiver. Is there anyone that is going to threaten the defense?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that's one of the bigger areas of intrigue / optimism this spring. So you mentioned Will Pauling moving on. 2 years ago, Will Pauling was one of the best slot receivers in the Big Ten, potentially the country. Last year was a weird version of Pauling. He had a lot of drops. Notre Dame picked him up. Still a very good player, but he wasn't quite as good last year. There's 2 guys on the outside I'd highlight. Vinny Anthony played last year. Average, I think it was 18 yards per catch, something like that. He has legit speed on the boundary. He's a really interesting guy who's developed. And then the Badgers this offseason went and got Jaden Ballard from Ohio State. And Ballard never really played there, but it wasn't for a lack of physical tools. Ballard was a true Ohio State receiver in terms of size, speed. He's just been behind. I mean, we all know who's been there, Harrison and Jermaine and Smith and all these Ibuka, right? He just hasn't been able to get on the field, but he is really turning heads in spring. He's already running with the ones. He's got some really nice highlights already out of spring. He's the type of guy that Wisconsin doesn't get in that room often that might have slipped through the cracks at Ohio State. So talking to someone inside the program, they said specifically of Ballard, he's really basically pissed off and ready to show people why he's a number one, why he can be that type of athlete. So I would highlight those 2 guys, Vinny and Ballard on the outside as potential guys that could really make some noise this year in the Big Ten.
Ryan, I see only 2 commits for this year thus far. Obviously, a lot of work to do before December. This last class was 24th in the country. The recruiting classes aren't quite as important as they used to be with the transfer portal. And of course, Luke Fickell went deep into the transfer portal, especially the first cycle. But has he made a difference in recruiting? Because we know what Paul Chryst and what that looked like, especially at the end of his tenure.
Yeah, so he's done a pretty good job, I would say. Now, this offseason, you mentioned 2 recruits, kind of a bit of a slow start for the Badgers. They lost a key cog in the recruiting department. For any USC fans that are watching this show, Max Steinecker is a tremendous recruiter, up-and-coming star. And he left this year to go join USC's recruiting department. I think we're seeing some of the impacts of that midstream. When you lose one of your key guys midstream in a cycle, I think long-term the Badgers will be fine, but it might impact this class. And by the way, we're already seeing some targets that Wisconsin and Max Steinecker were in on are now crystal balled to USC. So I think we're seeing some of the immediate impacts of that. If you're a USC fan, he's incredible. Max Steinecker is going to absolutely do incredible things at USC. So I think that's hurt this year's a little bit of a slower start. In general, he's done a good job of recruiting some of the spots Wisconsin has struggled with. They've done a good job landing a couple 4-star defensive linemen. I'm pretty sure you covered the Xavier Lucas situation, or at least maybe we mentioned it where Lucas was a Wisconsin commit. went to Miami, Wisconsin, like it is the whole thing. But that was a really big commitment for Wisconsin, 4-star cornerback out of Florida. So he has gotten Wisconsin some athletes that they typically don't have. But again, it's just kind of become, that's all great, but we lost 42-10 to Iowa, right? That's all great, but we won 5 games last year. So it's become very much a Wisconsin. We need to see it this year. We need to see some improvement. And that might not mean as much in the win-loss because of the schedule we referenced, but you can't lose by 32 to Iowa when they throw 10 passes type of a thing. Like that's just can't happen again.
That is a bit rough. Ryan Herring's here, Locked On Badgers. Ryan, we appreciate you stopping by. It's always good to see you, man. And everybody check out Ryan's show.
Really appreciate it. Always a joy to be on the show, man, and can't wait for some college football.
There it is. See you, Ryan.